Oh, I got a recording notice. Thanks, Ronald, for that very kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to join all of you today. And I do recognize I think everybody today. So I just want to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from my dining room here in Guelph. And the land that I live on is the traditional territory of many First Nations peoples, including the Adirondack, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, and the Ojibwe Chippewa peoples. And it is currently the Treaty 3 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And just to really, I think in particular, given just the horrific discoveries of lost and stolen children in unmarked graves and residential institutions across Canada, and acknowledging that we will unfortunately discover more as the weeks and months ahead of us, just to reaffirm my commitment. And I know we're supposed to be nonpartisan, but I'd say the Green Party's commitment to the 94 recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and my commitment to continuing to push the Ontario government to provide all the funding necessary for Indigenous-led searches of residential institutions in our province, and to really act. I think Canada Day was a day of reflection, but I think also, hopefully, for many people, was a day to encourage and action. And to think that just here in Guelph, for example, that an hour's drive away in Six Nations, which is Haudenosaunee territory, that we still have 3/4 of the residents of that particular reserve do not live with clean drinking water. That the disproportionate number of people in our prison system, people who are homeless, are Indigenous peoples, particularly in urban areas, and to really go beyond reflection and have that reflection turn into action. And I know that you'd asked me to speak today a bit about what it means being green over the next 11 months, but I think I'll do it within the context of your theme today around Reimagining Canada Day, because I think part of Reimagining Canada Day is reimagining our connection to the land, and doing it through an Indigenous lens, and thinking about how we learn from the previous 7 generations and apply those lessons to the next 7 generations and in the decisions we make today. And so in addition to just the horrific discoveries of unmarked graves, we're also dealing with some horrific environmental catastrophes that are happening right now. The heat dome over the Western United States and Canada, the record-breaking temperatures in British Columbia, the devastating fire in Lyndon, BC, where the highest recorded temperature in Canadian history was recorded. The fact that, luckily this particular fire is out, but yesterday the Gulf of Mexico literally was on fire due to a ruptured oil pipeline. And it makes you wonder, is this the world we want? Is this how we want to treat the land and the water and the creatures we share this world with? And I can tell you that it takes a lot of courage at times to speak out and to take a principled stand. And one of those examples for me happened earlier this year, just a couple months ago, when I was literally the only MPP at Queen's Park to vote against the government's resolution in support of Enbridge's Line 5 pipeline, which goes through the Straits of Mackinac in the Great Lakes between Lake Huron and Lake Superior, with the governor of Michigan saying, hey, this pipeline was built to last 50 years. It's been in operation for 65 years. And if there's a spill into the Great Lakes, it'll be devastating. And there was tremendous pressure for all MPPs to pass a unanimous resolution to say that pipelines are good, that we oppose what Michigan is doing, And I think one of the important points of having green voices in the legislature, and it doesn't even have to be a green voice from any particular party, I'll just say green voices across parties, is to stand up on principle and make hard votes like that particular vote. And so that's exactly why I think over the next 11 months that we need to be inspired by the way in which Indigenous peoples have cared for this land and make decisions around how we're going to protect the places we love in our province, in our communities, in our country. And so I want to talk about that in three ways. So the first is I think we have to halt the damage. And yesterday I was on a radio program in Ottawa and was asked to give advice to the new Minister of Environment, David Piccini. And I said, you know what? Just halt the damage that your government is inflicting on our environment. I mean, since the current government was elected, all of Ontario's climate plans have been dismantled. Renewable energy contracts were canceled at a cost of over $200 million, costing thousands of jobs. And over half of those renewable energy contracts were with Indigenous communities that were using renewable energy as a way to provide economic development in mostly First Nations communities. Since then, they've brought in a plan that is essentially a made-to-fail climate plan. Even the Auditor General, somebody who most people would consider a climate champion, has declared it a made-to-fail plan. And then they systematically began to dismantle all environmental protections, particularly environmental protections that protect land in Ontario. And we've seen that then be used to facilitate a number of proposals that threaten the places we love. And I think of the Highway 413 proposal that would pave over 2,000 acres of prime farmland, parts of the green belt, and destroy wetlands, and the Holland Marsh Highway, which is a smaller highway, but again would pave over parts of the Greenbelt and parts of the Holland Marsh, which is vital to flood mitigation and protection. We've seen the use of ministerial zoning orders to overturn planning rules to facilitate development, such as the Amazon warehouse proposal on the Duffins Creek wetland, which is the last major coastal wetland on Lake Ontario in the greater Toronto area. And again, wetlands, we've lost 75% of our wetlands in Southern Ontario. Those wetlands are vital to cleaning our drinking water and protecting us from flooding, which in Ontario is our largest climate risk. And so my first step, I would say, over the next 11 months is halt the damage. And in particular, when you think of these highway expansion proposals, those will facilitate sprawl development. And I would argue that the biggest threat to climate action in Ontario right now is sprawl development on green space land. And it's primarily for two reasons. So one is it's a huge driver of climate pollution. The largest source of climate pollution in Ontario is through our transportation systems. And the more we build highways and facilitate sprawl development, the more we're going to increase transportation emissions in Ontario. And not to mention just thinking of quality of life. I think one of the lessons we've learned from the pandemic is just how important it is to live in connected, affordable, sustainable communities. And to, the more we sprawl develop, the more people have to live in places that are not where they work, or they have not near the local businesses they want to support, the services and amenities people need in their lives. And it forces people to live carbon polluting lifestyles, and many times not out of their own choice, but because it's the only place they can find to have an affordable place to live. So I've been arguing, and the Green Party, I've been very, very excited about our affordable housing strategy around building affordable, livable communities, which has been endorsed by the Toronto Star, TVO, and others. And it's really about how do we engage in responsible land use planning in a way that addresses the climate crisis. And it's really about building affordable communities where people can live, work, play, support the local businesses they need and want. And so some people haven't sort of maybe seen, actually National Observer wrote a great article about the Green Party's climate infused housing affordability plan, but people haven't recognized the link between how we use land, how we develop on land, how we build the communities and the places we live, and how that is so intimately linked to the climate crisis. I would also argue that, and so that really begins to address transportation emissions, which is the largest source of emissions in Ontario. The next thing that we need to do is address climate pollution from our buildings, which is the second, or actually the third largest source of emissions. And so we proposed a $5 billion green building plan, which would leverage $80 billion in additional private capital investment, create over 800,000 jobs, reduce people's energy bills by $5 billion a year, and significantly reduce climate pollution from our buildings. The third largest source of emissions in Ontario comes from industry. And that is exactly why we are proposing a significant investment in incentivizing clean tech innovation in Ontario. We know from Bloomberg and other business publications that the fastest growing part of our economy is in the clean economy. Ontario is perfectly positioned to leverage that coming out of COVID through a green recovery to create new career and job opportunities for people while addressing the climate crisis. But I think given the events of the last few days, not only do we need to talk about how do we mitigate and reduce climate pollution, but also how we adapt to the climate crisis. And so much of the importance around adapting is to actually continue to protect nature's ability to protect us for free. And that's why we're proposing a number of changes to land use planning and water protection that will enable nature to protect us. So one is no development on wetlands, period. We simply can't afford to lose any more wetlands in Ontario. We need to have protections in place such as the Greenbelt around the GTA and around Ottawa and to extend that across the province to protect prime farmland, which will help create ways to mitigate extreme heat, but also help us to absorb excess water to avoid flooding. And then the final thing I want to say that I think needs to happen over the next 11 months is for people to engage in politics. Because the bottom line is climate action is a collective action challenge. There's a lot of talk about what individuals can do, and there are important things that we can all do as individuals, but the bottom line is we need collective action, and in a democratic society, the best way to do that is through politics. And so for voting for parties that deny climate action or even deny that climate change exists, or even more progressive parties that are implementing half measures during a time when we need urgent, full-scale, comprehensive solutions to address the climate crisis, won't get things done. So I would challenge people over the next 11 months to keep putting on the existing government, because quite frankly, we can't wait until after the next election to address the climate crisis, but to also engage in politics and supporting whatever politicians of whatever political party who you believe will put pressure on government and will go into parliaments and city municipal councils to put forward the policy solutions we need to address climate in a way that respects the integrity of our democracy and our democratic institutions. So I just want to close by saying it's been a real honor to join you today. And I think it's fantastic that you've created a Toastmasters space for people to practice their public speaking, because we need people, whether you're formally in politics or not, to be out engaging with their neighbors, family, friends, and work colleagues about the climate crisis that we face, the need to address it, and how reconciliation with Indigenous peoples will play a vital role in helping us do that. So thank you, Miigwech, merci.
Thank you very much, Mike. Real pleasure hearing your thoughts today on this topic. And we'll take just a moment to write down some thoughts that we might share with Mike or perhaps with Candice, because she'll still be with us. I know that Mike has to go off to a very important appointment coming up shortly to get the main under control.